Sentire Media.
Welcome back to another episode of A New Life in Italy. I'm your host, Samantha Wilson, and today we're exploring a topic that fascinates and inspires a lot of people, and that is the health and the longevity of Italians. Now, I will confess, you can probably hear it in my voice that I am just getting over COVID, which is why we didn't have an episode last week. I'm sorry about that. So this topic actually is quite timely even for me. Italy is renowned for its healthy lifestyle, and we're always talking about the Mediterranean diet and how this culture that celebrates leisure and family can help increase happiness and decrease loneliness, which many people believe contribute to the long life expectancy here. But there's more to it than just diet and exercise and the connection to people. In this episode, we are going to look at what it's really like to live healthily in Italy, the healthcare system, and what happens when you get sick. We're going to discuss everything from where to find medicine, how to see specialists, and the role of the GP here. Plus, we'll compare it to other systems around the world to see why Italians seem to lead healthier and longer lives. And I have a special guest today, and she is an expert in this area, and we are going to dive deep into the everyday habits and the cultural norms that contribute to this phenomenon. So it's not just the diet. There is more to this story. Are you ready? Let's get started. I'm Samantha Wilson, Chief Dreammaker at smartmoveitaly.com, and this is A New Life in Italy, a show where each week I take you behind the scenes of what it's really like to move to Italy, introduce you to some fascinating people, answer your questions, and show you how starting a new life in Bel Paese is possible for you. So I've been sick this last week, and like many people this summer, I think COVID has run through a lot of families. It did mine, and it really hit me quite hard and quite quickly. And I'm generally a pretty healthy person, and maybe I pay sort of marginal attention to what I eat and what I drink and really what I do. So I guess maybe in a way, I have been quite lucky in that I'm rarely sick. And if you're new to Italy, or if you're just even traveling through and you happen to get sick, whether it's just a little cold or this COVID, it can be a little bit scary to find the help that you need, especially if you don't understand the language or exactly where to go or what medicines to buy. So let's start there. First, if you have a serious health issue, like you're having a heart attack or even a medical emergency, just go straight to the pronto soccorso. This is the emergency ward at the closest hospital, and they'll take care of you immediately, regardless if you have health care or not, or even travel insurance. It is your human right in Italy to be taken care of if there's an emergency. But if you're not in an emergency and you're just unwell and you want to self-treat yourself like to the COVID or the flu, then what you need is a comfy place to stay and rest and lots of medication. But what kind of medication can you buy over the counter here in Italy? Well, most flu medication and pain medication can be bought over the counter. In fact, you can get some pretty good stuff here. It's pretty strong and sometimes more than in your home country. All you have to do is speak to the pharmacist and explain to them what your problem is, and they'll help you out. Now, there's two main distinctions here, or two differences that can be handy to know. And this is in regards to the type of medication that you need to buy if you are sick, if you have the flu, or you have a headache or something like that. If you're looking for ibuprofen, for example, an Advil, or something that you want to reduce inflammation, look for a brand in Italy called Moment, M-O-M-E-N-T, Moment. This has an anti-inflammatory in it of ibuprofen. Now, Moment has lots of different versions. There's, Moment Sinus, Moment Headache, Moment Act, which is the super strong version of it. You get the picture. But Moment is the brand that you can look for anti-inflammatory ibuprofen. There's others, but the Moment is the one that seems to do the trick. Now, the equivalent of Tylenol, however, which does not have ibuprofen, it's called Taccaprina. So if this is your preferred go-to other than something that has ibuprofen in, look for Taccaprina. This will help with your fever as well if you have COVID. You can also get some really amazing throat spray. So I'm back to this COVID again, because one of the symptoms is a pretty sore throat. And your throat in Italy is called the gola. So you're looking for something to ease the pain of your throat. And there's this incredible spray that I discovered decades ago here, and I loved it. Every time I would come to Italy, I'd buy a bunch, throw them in my bag, and bring them home. And it's just a spray that you spray into your throat, but it's super, super powerful. It doesn't taste all that great. But it really, really works. And in fact, my son just had COVID as well, and his throat was so sore, he went through an entire bottle in one day. Now, that's not recommended at all, but you get the idea. It's a really great thing. And there's a lot of different brands, but you just ask for, sore throat gola spray. Pharmacists will let you know. Now, there's also throat lozenges. I always say it wrong. I don't think it's lozenges. My husband always laughs at me, but you know what I mean. The little, like little candies that you can suck on if your throat is sore. The ones that they have here are medicated, and they really, really help. But again, you're only supposed to take a couple of them in a day. You don't eat the whole packet, like my son did as well. So overall, the medicines that you can get over the counter for COVID or for the flu, if you can self-treat yourself, are pretty good. In fact, they're really, really good. And you can buy them all at the pharmacy. So unlike other countries, you cannot buy these medicines in a grocery store or a corner store, only at the pharmacy. And a pharmacy is the shops that have that lit green cross sign in front of them. And here's a little tip. If the light is on, if the green cross light is on, that means that the pharmacy is open. If it's off, that means the pharmacy is closed. And make sure you stock up on these medicines if you need them, because pharmacies often close during the day, just like other shops here. So between 1 or 3-ish, often pharmacies will be closed for the break. And some of them are closed even on the weekends. In law in Italy, however, all the towns and all the cities have to have a certain number of pharmacies open on Sundays as well. But they rotate. It's not always the same one. So be sure to prepare in advance, because it's really kind of horrible if you're sick and you can't get into a pharmacy just to get these meds to ease some of this discomfort. Now, if you feel like you need to see a doctor, maybe not an emergency, but a doctor, there is like a drop-in clinic here in Italy. So even if you're just traveling through and you're feeling really bad and you just think that you need to go see a doctor at a drop-in clinic, look for something called the Guardia Medica. And this is like a public drop-in clinic. They're usually attached to the general ASLA, the health departments, wherever you are or wherever you live. And they will have specific hours that you can Google the Guardia Medica in your area to find out. And there's usually a few of them to choose from. And like I say, in these clinics, you can drop in, you'll see a doctor. He or she will even be able to write you a prescription, and you can use that to take it to the pharmacy and get whatever medicine they're prescribing for you. And you'll obviously pay for that. You'll pay a fee for the doctor, not much, like 30, 40 euros. And of course, for your medicine. But the medicine over the counter here, even prescription medicine, is incredibly cheap compared to what you might be expecting. There are also a lot of apps out there now that help foreigners or people who just don't speak Italian find a doctor that speaks English or speaks your language. There's one called Doctors in Italy, and I know this one. I've never used it personally, so I can't speak personally about it, but I do know people who have used it, and it's pretty handy. Now, they don't have doctors all over the place, but in the major cities, they certainly do. Also, if you're looking for an English-speaking doctor, it's nice to get into the Facebook groups of that local community that you're in and ask the other expats if they found or can recommend a really good English-speaking doctor in your area. They are few and far between, so when you find one that you like, stick with it, and you'll be, one step ahead of most people when they're trying to find an English-speaking doctor here. If you move to Italy, you will eventually participate in the public healthcare system. And you can do this either by paying a voluntary fee. If you're working, it will come right off of your paycheck, the taxes to cover it. Or if you are Italian, you will get healthcare for free. Well, sort of. You're still paying taxes in Italy. So, but you don't pay a voluntary fee every single year. But regardless of how you enter the healthcare system here in Italy, you will eventually enter it. And many people I speak with ask, what is the difference between the Italian system and others? And most importantly, why do Italians live so long? And how does the healthcare system and the culture in general contribute to this longevity? So today I asked Dr. Susan Levenstein, who is an American living and practicing medicine in Rome. And she's been doing that and has been here for a very long time, in fact, almost 40 years. And I asked her why Italians live longer than Americans, and her answers were kind of shocking. Now, before I bring Dr. Levenstein in, I want to tell you a little bit more about her. We first met a few years ago after she released her book called Doctoressa, An American Doctor in Rome. And I found her blog, Stethoscope on Rome, and I really loved the way that she wrote, and not to mention learning about all of the things, obviously her expertise in caring for yourself in the healthcare in Italy. Now, she comes with a lot of credentials. She is a Harvard University graduate, of course, and passed the board at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine in the U.S. So she comes with, a lot of expertise and a lot of credentials. She has a career spanning over 4 decades here, and she's not only a respected clinician, but also a researcher and a lecturer on the interactions between mind and body in organic disease, which is really quite an interesting approach here in Italy. And so today she's going to share her insights into the health of Italians, the lifestyle, her perspective on the differences, in other words, why Italians are living longer. And she's also going to dive into whether the reputed health and longevity of Italians hold up under scientific scrutiny. Well, hello, Dr. Levenstein. I am so happy to see you again. And how long have you been practicing? You're still practicing in Rome, right?
I am. I'm not taking any new patients, but I have promised to keep seeing my old patients until I drop. That's basically the story.
Okay.
And and I'm still seeing, I see generally about 6 patients a week, 3 on Monday and 3 on Friday. That's usually how it's been running. And that's it. So I've been practicing since 1980.
1980.
So I'm just about up to, I started, I got my first, did you read my book?
I've read parts of your book. I haven't read all your book. I will confess.
Okay. Cause I have, I started at the beginning of 1980, I started trying to get my Italian license in late 1978, and then I managed to get it in 1980, and at the very end of 79, and then I set up practice. my first office stopped before I saw a single patient.
Well,
I saw a single patient.
How come? Why did that happen?
Well, I explain it in the book. I mean, what happened was that a guy who was semi-retired to Rome said that he was renting an office from an accountant, from a commercialista, and that he would let me use it he had a room that he was renting, and that he would let me use it 2 mornings a week. And so I went in, I had prescription forms printed up, and I went in with my little, stethoscope and my blood pressure machine. And I went in and I found a note on the desk that said, "The landlord has changed his mind.
Oh, it's so Italian.
Leave the key."
Oh my goodness.
So I left the key. So that's the story of that. And then I was saved. I tell all of these things in detail. And there's a chapter in the book that I call seven offices, 7 hills.
Oh.
Because I covered most of the 7 hills of Rome between one office and another. And then my mother-in-law, my Italian mother-in-law, came to the rescue. Because she had a neighbor who was a dermatologist who owned an office around the corner. We were living, I was living with her at the time, with my husband and my Italian husband, my first husband. And we found, the dermatologist let me use the office for for 2 mornings a week. And that was the story.
Mm.
And that was about in, I think, it was definitely 1980. I think it was in about February 1980. It was in the early part of the year.
Mm.
And so I've been practicing for more than 44 years.
Yeah. Did you practice in the US before you moved here?
I didn't practice. I came here immediately after I came to Italy, immediately after taking my boards in internal medicine.
Okay.
And I came, I didn't land here immediately because my husband and I spent 6 weeks first traveling in Kenya. And then we came back here to Rome.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful, actually.
Right. Well, back in that time too, in the 80s, it was, I'm sure, entirely different than what it is now.
When did you get here?
Well, I've been coming here for 20 years. So, but living here not that long. Yeah, it's changed. I mean, even in 20 years.
So
but
you're a
I
newcomer.
imagine I am to you. I'm just a newbie. Yeah, exactly.
You'll see if you read my book, you'll see there were amazing things that I tell. So.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm going to put the link to as everybody's listening, I'm sure. The book is called Doctoressa, right? That's the name of your book. Okay, so
subtitle American Doctor in Rome.
In Rome, yeah. And you've been practicing all that time. So I know you haven't worked in the US, but and I'm sure things have changed since the 80s to now. But how can you, if I had to ask you, what really is the differences between being, the healthcare in Italy compared to the healthcare in the US, in your opinion?
Okay, if you want, I can give you what I wrote down about it, what I sketched out or something to say. I mean that in Italy, the Servizio Sanitario Nazionale is what delivers by far most healthcare, and it's modeled on the British system. And you know all about this. I'm sure you have.
Mm-hmm.
You must be on the system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And all residents of Italy, including foreigners, anybody who's a legal resident, has a tax-funded network of general practitioners, labs, specialists, and hospitals. And there's no or minimal co-payments at the point of care,
Mm-hmm.
and even for very expensive and very cutting-edge treatments.
Right.
And that's real huge strength of the system. And then there's the limited private sector that has its own laboratories, specialists, and hospitals. And it's used by the 10 or 12% of Italians who have private insurance, and lots of others who often think that they'll get better care there. And actually now, the latest thing that I read was that 40% of specialist visits in Rome, in Italy in general, are with private people.
Right. Well, I admit this is usually the route that I go. What I really like about the Italian healthcare system, and I've been in different ones in different countries, and what I like the most about the Italian is this back and forth, or this overlap of the public and the private system as well. So you can go to the private system and it's affordable comparatively, of course, to other countries. It's affordable and it's accessible. And what I found in my experience is that it actually, the specialists that work in the private system also work in the public system.
Some of them.
Yeah.
And what other countries are you familiar with?
Canada, the UK, and France.
Okay.
And the US, because my mom's American, so I'm really quite familiar. I've personally not been through the US system, but my mother has, so I do understand the pain points in that side.
I have to confess that I don't see the American healthcare as a system, but it's more of a hodgepodge. It lacks any kind of organizing principle. And for me, the worst aspect is the presence or even the predominance of the profit motive.
Right.
So about half of American healthcare is actually publicly funded. People don't realize that. Between Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, and the Veterans Administration. And the United States, as we know, is the only advanced economy that doesn't offer universal access to affordable healthcare. And it spends much more per capita and gets much worse outcomes.
Yeah. But can I ask you a question about that in relation to Italy? Because we usually never say organized and Italy in the same sentence, right? These two things is kind of an oxymoron. But
Right.
when you just explained the American system, you're saying it's a hodgepodge. Would you say the Italian system is the same or better?
Well, actually, I can't possibly say that it's better because, first of all, because American doctors are much better trained, both in medical school and in the specialty residencies. There's no question about that. The GP residency that you have to do in order to become an Italian general practitioner is a particularly weak one. It has it's really very bad in all sorts of ways. And American hospitals are far superior to Italian hospitals. And especially emergency rooms and intensive care units. The emergency rooms, because emergency rooms require quick thinking, and Italians don't have urgent,
Right.
don't have that sense of urgency.
Yeah.
And ICUs, because that requires precision, and Italians are not very strong on precision. Okay, but I would say that Italian medical care is now much better than it was 40 years ago, but it's still by no means up to European standards. The training is still not sufficiently hands-on, and the whole system is underfunded.
So my question, I just want to I want to jump in there too, because I mean, this is great because it makes me wonder though, if the healthcare system is not great here, it's underfunded and, the doctors aren't trained all that well. How do people live so long in Italy? How is it that we feel that Italians are so healthy?
Okay, you want me to talk about that? That's fine. Number one is because there is universal access to healthcare at virtually no cost. Italian hospitals and doctors may not be the best in the world, but they can handle most medical issues just fine.
Okay.
Number two, the Mediterranean diet, of which the Italian version is perhaps the most famous and probably, the one that's still most closely followed. It's low in saturated fats, it's low in calories, it's high in olive oil, and it's largely plant-based.
So then so people aren't obese here. There's not the same problems with obesity in Italy.
I'll give you a statistic, one quick one. Okay. Americans get 58% of their calories from junk food.
58?
Yes. Italians get 10%. And also, though you may have been reading that drinking alcohol to any degree is not good for you, this is all BS. Actually, moderate wine drinking with meals does reduce both the risk of heart disease and increase longevity.
Right.
And as far as alcohol, the point is that if you're a binge drinker, which is what Americans do, Americans and English, then that is really, really bad for you. Americans have 8 times more alcohol-related deaths per capita than Italians do. Okay.
So the cultural, even the acceptance or the behavior of diet and alcohol and entertainment is completely different, and it's just a natural difference.
Okay, and the obesity rate in America is approximately 40% now. In Italy, it's 10%. That's obesity. Overweight plus obesity is over 70%.
Oh my goodness. And this is 58% of their calories are all junk food. I mean, it's not, and the culture here as far as, being healthy, or I don't even think that, honestly, I don't even think that the Italians think I'm going to have a glass of wine and eat this food because it's healthy. It's just what they do. And they walk and they move, the movement, right? The need to move, or you have to, you can't drive everywhere here.
Okay. I'll get to that in a minute. I have these all numbered.
Okay.
And 1 was the healthcare system, and 2 was the Mediterranean diet. 3, how many Italian adults own guns? 2.5%. 2.5%.
Now, the guns that they own would be probably for recreation or sport, something like this, right? It's
almost all of them. I can't remember the percentage, but I have read it. Almost all of them, I think it's about 90%, are for either hunting or target practice.
Yeah.
And in the United States, 42% of Americans own guns. Mm. And it has 11 times more gun deaths. I have all these numbers.
Yeah.
Also, then there's drugs. Heroin and cocaine were somewhat of a problem in Italy in the 1970s and 1980s, but they really haven't been around since then. And abuse of prescription drugs is almost unheard of.
So why is that? Why do you think that is in Italy?
They're not addictive people. That's all, I think.
You think so? Do you think, is it also?
It's not, because it's not just the drugs, the formal drugs, but it's also the alcohol. Like I say, there's what was it? 8 times more alcohol-related deaths per capita than Italians do. Americans have.
Yeah.
And so there's much more addiction to, and I wrote in the book that the United States had 10 times more problem drinkers, defined in whatever way it's supposed to be.
Can I deviate a little bit there, because it's on my head? And when you're talking about the, prescription drug addiction, one of the things I've noticed here is that you don't get a pill for everything that you do. I know people in North America that they're taking 5 different blood pressure pills. It's just one. It's just they keep getting thrown medicine at them. If there's a problem, a doctor in the US will give them medicine. But they don't necessarily do that here, do they? There's alternate ways that they can they treat problems here.
Well, they tend to treat problems by giving everybody a diet of some kind of dietary thing to follow. That's sort of the standard. No, I really think that it's not an addictive culture. Mm. And even though I can write a prescription for the equivalent of OxyContin, mm-hmm. I can write that.
Yeah.
But still, any doctor can write that. And still, it has not been a problem at all. The Americans are 30 times more likely to die of an overdose than Italians. Okay?
These are incredible statistics.
That's a small number. Okay. Italy is low. Italy's overdose rate is low even in Europe. And the countries that are the worst are in Scandinavia and Ireland. I'm not quite sure why this is. Okay, number 5, you already mentioned this. More than half of Italians do some kind of formal, regular physical exercise, and they also habitually walk rather than using their car.
Yeah. So by formal exercise, you mean going to the gym or playing a sport of some sort?
I was surprised at this number.
Yeah, but me too.
This is a very recent statistic.
Because, I don't see Italians out jogging all that much. Although, they obviously some do, but I see a lot of cycling.
Yeah.
So I guess for sport.
Much more popular here than it is in the States, but that's, actual cycling. Americans to get on the stationary bike.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and then that was number 5 of doing of exercise. Number 6 is income inequality, and that has been shown to be a risk factor for poor health. And there's much more income inequality in the United States than there is in Italy.
So by this, you mean that for example, in the US, the income inequality, if you are on a lower end of the income scale, you are living in a place that doesn't have access to good food or proper education or proper services. Is this what you mean?
No, not just that. The very existence of having income inequality, having there be a huge gap between the people who are on the upper end, say on the upper 10% and the lower 10% of income, having a large gap like that has been associated in many studies in itself with poor health.
Mm.
And it's not entirely clear to me why, but in any case, it's a fact.
Perhaps it's a combination of all of those things that you told me about, all of, the junk food, the access to firearms, all of it maybe is a combination. And in Italy, there's not that much disparity.
Yeah, there's not. I don't know if you know how much other people earn, by and large, it's much narrower than it is, than it is in the United States. And finally, I have one more thing, where I wrote, I'm convinced that the welfare state that gives Italians triple the vacation time, much more sick leave, much more paid maternity leave, and I'm convinced that that contributes to their better health.
I love that. I think you're right. And one thing I noticed is I always use these terms. It's that because Ferragosto is coming up, right? And I'm looking forward to it really seriously, Susan. I really want my holidays this year. And I love this idea of having permission to be sick, permission to take a holiday, permission, to take time away from your commitments at work, which helps reduce your stress and makes you feel better. But in the other cultures, this is almost a sign of weakness. And I know that there's people who never take holidays because they're afraid of losing their job or someone stepping in or losing their position. We're here, even with our clients, when we say, sorry, we're closed for 2 weeks in August. And they're thinking, how do you possibly close a business for 2 weeks and not go broke? And I always remind, because there was a commercialist of ours, we said to him, no, it wasn't not us, one of our clients said to him, okay, you're closed. Fine. They're trying to process. Okay, but what if there's an emergency? And he said, well, I'll talk to you in September. That was his answer to what if there's an emergency? Because there isn't always an emergency. And I love the idea of the permission and the breaks that you mentioned. And I don't see that in North America.
Okay, I'll tell you something else. Italians smoke more than Americans. It's not as much as it was, but still, the gap is still there. And they do, I can't remember how many times Americans do, I think 3 or 4 times as many coronary angiograms and, stents and things like that. And you would think that would make them healthier. But in fact, where is this statistic? Where is my statistic? Americans are 4 times more likely to be obese. We've said that. They're 60% more likely to die of heart disease, even though they do all of those stents.
Yeah.
Because the stenting does not save lives.
They have to get to the reason why they need the stent in the first place, right?
And it's even though the Italians smoke more, and so that puts them more at risk. And I'll tell you another statistic that you may find questionable, which is that Italians are Americans are 60% more likely to die in a car crash.
Well, how can that be? Look at Italy.
Drunken driving.
That's
the answer. That's the answer. Because Italians tend to, they may drive crazy. They may go the wrong way, down the one-way street, but they don't tend to drive drunk.
Right. Well, because they're not out binge drinking.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why there is more likelihood that an American will die in a car crash, and also. Americans have double the suicide rate of Italians. Double.
And the reason for this, do you think it's just a combination of all of it that we've been talking about, all of the stress and all of the,
Partly that and largely the guns, because the most effective way to kill yourself is to shoot yourself.
Sure.
And the fact that all of those Americans are armed, there are more, as we know, notoriously, there are more guns in America than there are human beings.
But what about mental health, though? Because that does take a play. Do you have any statistics or do you know anything about how that plays out in Italy in comparison?
Mental health, not really.
Yeah.
The rates of serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia and, psychotic manic depressive disorder, are pretty consistent across all countries.
Mm-hmm.
So madness is consistent across all countries.
Mm-hmm.
As far as depression and so on is concerned, there aren't that many good numbers on that. And also Americans have double the infant mortality, by the way.
Mm.
And we've talked about stress a little bit, but another element is that that is the issue of social isolation.
Yeah.
And a recent polls say that about 1 in 5 Americans are suffering from social isolation, and they're especially in older people. And that has been documented as showing bad health outcomes and even shorter lifespans.
Mm-hmm. The loneliness.
Whereas Italians still live relatively stable lives. They have strong social networks. They usually form a circle of lifelong friends when they're young, and they have close-knit families, strong families. They usually stick close to home when they, after they get out of school, and and when they go to college, and where they work, and they wouldn't dream of moving away when they retire.
Yeah, or they wouldn't dream of putting their parents in an old home when they're old.
Yeah.
And I mean, all of this stuff, Susan, is really, to me, revolves around it. At the beginning, people just think Italians are healthier because they eat better and they exercise, but it's more than that. It's all of those things that you mentioned, and they all come together to create this almost perfect storm. Not really a storm, but this perfect recipe. Yeah, the perfect recipe for this longevity that everybody talks about and hears about, and there's movies made about. But it's not one thing in itself. It really is this combination. I'm really hung up on the loneliness side of it because, of course, as you know, we deal with a lot of people who move to Italy, and they feel very lonely at the beginning. And it's this. I have always stressed of how important it is to not be by yourself or not be completely alone, because it can eat away at you. And I love the network of the Italian family and the culture that it brings, because I think that has a whole lot to do with it.
Okay. Is your husband Italian?
No, he's not. He's British.
Okay. Now, the bottom line, let me just, I wanted to get to the bottom line at some point, which is that at this point, I looked up the very most recent figures. The United States spends more than 4 times as much than Italy on healthcare per capita. More than 4 times.
4 times. And they've got all these problems. It's still not working.
The life expectancy is 5 years shorter. Almost 5 years shorter. 79.3 years in the States. 84.1 in Italy. And that's overall.
Huge difference.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
So the end of the moral of the story is, not everybody can move and live in Italy, but they can make these changes, right? They can subtly make these changes to their life.
Yeah, sort of.
They can try.
The way that I summarized this both in my book and in my standard PowerPoint presentation is that the way that the Italian you asked it in terms of this, your question as the way that you wrote it down, what lessons from the Italian healthcare system and lifestyle do you think could be beneficial if adopted in the United States? And number 1 is learn to live like Italians. Number 2 is reduce income inequality. Neither of these things are happening. Number 3 is give everybody access to affordable health care. And only the last of these, as I see it, only the last of these has any chance of happening. And it's still pretty unlikely, given that in 2023, after 13 years of Obamacare, more than 25 million Americans were still uninsured. That's 7.7%.
They're not getting the care they need.
So they have no health care insurance of any kind. That's the number who and that's not just the ones that aren't getting adequate care or anything like that, not taking into account the inferior care that they get in local hospitals. And, it's not not the most glorious. Okay. So that's what I said to that. And then you asked another question about how Italians and Americans perceive their healthcare.
Yeah, I love that idea because I think that I know because our Americans say to me all the time, "Oh, if I get sick, their impression of Italy is like a third world country as far as medical care goes. In my experience, it's actually been really quite good, and it's affordable and accessible. Might not be as fancy or as advanced as some other countries, but it certainly gets the job done in their own sort of Italian way. But they seem to perceive that it's such a great system, although it's an expensive system elsewhere. I'm not so sure that's true.
Yeah. Okay. France is notoriously supposed to be the best organized and the best around, the best overall. I can tell you the numbers. I looked them all up. In Italy, I wrote in my book that the percent of Italians who were satisfied with the National Health Service was 21% in Sicily, 60% near Venice, which is still not extremely high. And in November 2023, they did another survey, and they found that the overall satisfaction had hit 55%, which was a lot better. And it was 37% in the South and well over 60% in the North. Mm-hmm. In France, the satisfaction overall is 85%.
Wow.
In Germany, it's 71%. Yeah. And people are asked, are you satisfied with that? And okay, in the United States, I also looked that one up recently.
Good. I was going to ask.
In my book, I cited a 2017 Gallup poll, which said that 71% of Americans said the healthcare system was in a state of crisis or had major problems. And that it's almost the same thing now. In February 2024, an Ipsos poll found that most Americans were satisfied with their own primary care doctor. That's 70% were happy with their own doctor, but only 32% were extremely or very satisfied with the American healthcare system.
Very low.
So that's about the same of people saying, about 70% were not satisfied.
Yeah.
And
well, I think that, yeah, you're maybe go, Well, I can tell you that I know that our listeners, many of them are American. So I'm sure you've added a lot of food for thought for them to think about in the comparison. If they're considering, a lot of people move here when they're older. So healthcare and their care is a really big issue. And I think that from my experience and from the experience that I've had with other people here, the combination, it isn't just the fact that you're going to be able to see a doctor and have health care and be able to be permitted to be sick. And it's not a weakness to be sick here. You can actually, people pay very close attention to themselves and their bodies and what their bodies are telling them, which is one of the things I love. But that actually overall, the quality of life with this cultural change and like we talked about with the absence of the violence and the absence of all of the bad things that we're seeing in other countries, your chances of, you're living a healthy, happy life here in Italy are much better.
Much better. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I loved this conversation. I am going to put in the show notes. Now, you also have a blog called Stethoscope in Rome, and I'm going to put
on Rome. Stethoscope
on Rome. Sorry. Stethoscope on Rome, and I'm going to put the link and in the show notes, as well as to your book, which I know you can buy it on Amazon, Dr. Nessa, and for anybody to see.
Yeah, in the States, you can buy it on Amazon at a reasonable price. In Italy, for some reason, they have it priced very high, ridiculously high.
Okay. I think they can. Yeah, I think it's a very good read. I mean, it is what it's worth. And I'm going to put the link inside the show notes so if people want to buy it, they can find it there. Thank you so much for coming today. I really love our chats. It's been a while since we've talked, but I do love it.
It was a pleasure.
Well, I think that was a lot to think about, actually, because not only did Dr. Levenstein talk to us about the healthcare system in Italy, but I think what I really took away was this very big difference in the behaviors and the cultural approach, not just to your health here in Italy, but really to your behavior and how that directly contributes to the Italians' long life. And I think all of the factors that she talked to have something to think about. And maybe we can consider how we live our lives here and maybe elsewhere. And if there's some small changes that we can make to help live longer and happier, that's something to be seriously considered. Now, for all of you who are inspired by this episode and want to learn more about Dr. Levenstein, the link to her book, Doctoressa, and her blog, which is on Substack, it's called Stethoscope on Rome, are all here in the show notes. So just head over there and you can find out more. It's time for listener questions. Just like the old radio call-in shows, my team has picked 3 listener questions, all left on our voicemail. I have no idea what these questions are, but I haven't been stumped yet. Are you ready? Let's get started.
If you move to Italy and you bring with you liquid assets such as IRA and savings account money, do you have to pay taxes on that as income? ?
Well, taxes are, it's a big subject and a big question, but I'm going to give you an overview of what it means when you move to Italy and become a resident as far as taxable status goes. Residency means that you have moved the center of your life over here to Italy, meaning you live here full time and you will become a taxable resident. And when that happens in Italy, it happens 2 ways, one of 2 ways. One is you live here, you move here, the center of your life is here, and you live more than 183 days a year in Italy. In this case, you will be deemed a taxable resident in de facto, so you are technically a resident for tax purposes in Italy. The other way is if you walk into the municipality, the comune where you live, and you say, hey, I live here, I am a resident, now I want my benefits. And the benefits to residency are things like being able to open a bank account, join the healthcare system, buy a car, get your driver's license, these kinds of things you cannot do unless you have a residency. Now, once you become a resident of Italy, you are taxed, you're evaluated, taxed on your worldwide income and your worldwide assets, the value of your assets. And this is called wealth tax here in Italy. Now, depending on where you live, wealth tax may or may not be calculated or applied. For example, if you live in a 7% flat tax, if you're retired, take a pension and have elected the 7% flat tax in the area that you live, qualifying area, then you don't have to pay the tax on that wealth, which would include your investments and properties, foreign assets, things like that. However, if you live outside of a 7% zone, you will pay income tax on your worldwide income, plus a percentage, depending on the asset, of wealth tax that you hold in the foreign country, which would be your home country now. Now, it's really complicated to figure out how much that tax will be, and there are double taxation treaties. So the best thing that you should do is speak to a commercialista in Italy, and this is like a tax accountant here, and explain to them your specific situation, what money you're actually bringing in and what money is just as an investment, and how you will be taxed on either one of those. That is the only way that you will be able to answer this question specifically for yourself and give yourself the clarity that you need to decide where you want to live in Italy and what's the best way for you for tax purposes.
Hi, Samantha. I'll be retiring in the next few years, and the ERV caught my attention. The thing is, I'm not sure if I'll want to live in Italy the rest of my life. Would it be okay to move there on the ERV for just a few years if I change my mind, or would that complicate my pension too much? Thank you.
Well, the elective residency visa is a good visa if you don't work and you're planning to move to Italy and live full time, because the ERV is designed for that. It is not a visa just to extend your 90 days. It's a visa that says, I elect to take residency in Italy and live there. Now, there's no note that says you have to, once you're here, you can never leave again. You can certainly move on if Italy is not what you hoped it was, for sure. The obligation, however, of the elective residency visa is that you take residency here. And normally you'll do that usually about a year after you arrive, after you've followed through with the permesso di soggiorno process, which is the permit to stay. And that's good for 1 year, renewable. You renew it every year. So there's a few steps you have to go through, but any time within that process, when you've arrived on your ERV, you're certainly allowed to leave Italy and decide not to live here. Just one little note, if you are listening to this and you are here on an ERV and decide you want to move back, please make sure that you go into the comune, the anagraphy office that you live in the tax office, and make sure that you deregister as a resident. Don't just pack up and leave. You actually have to tell them that you are no longer a resident, a taxable resident of Italy. This is really important. Otherwise, the tax office will continue to expect to evaluate and tax you on your residential status.
Hi, Sam. I hear a ton of conflicting information in regards to the €1 home. Are they any good? Are they bad? Can you give me a full answer on this, please? Thank you.
I think the €1 homes are good for a few things. One, it's great for promotion and publicity of these small, often forgotten towns in Italy that really have their own charm as well. And the other is to just help spark people's dream to move to Italy. But in reality, the €1 home scheme is a really challenging method for a foreigner to buy a property, renovate, and then eventually live in it. And that is because these homes, these €1 homes, are not habitable. So you can't just move in. They need a tremendous amount of work, usually hundreds of thousands of euros worth of work to make it what you're probably dreaming it to be. And there's often a lot of problems with the documentation, the location, the access to the location. I mean, there's a reason that they haven't been used by the family and they are neglected. And that they're €1, that, there's a reason for that. So although some people have done the €1 projects and have really loved it and had an interesting experience and have a great house, it's not cheap. And what we usually find is this sort of conflict between people who are seeking a €1 home. It's because it's a budget option for Italy, or thought of as a budget option, and the reality that it is not a budget option. If you have a lower budget to buy property in Italy, there are some really great buys out there. So certainly you can get a lot more for your money here than you can probably in your home country. But also never forget that there's a reason things are priced the way that they are. In the south of Italy, you will get a lot more for your money. So you can get something in the 30, 50, under €100,000 range. That is pretty good. And I suggest that if you are, looking to buy a lower cost home, that you don't focus on the €1 home, because in reality, it's going to cost you the 50 to 100,000 anyway. But instead focus on a property that's already habitable, needs obviously some work, but that you know what you're getting a little more, you know what you're getting into, rather than the €1 home. Well, that's all for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about visas, citizenship, property, and really anything about moving to Italy that you would like me to answer in an upcoming episode, please feel free to send us a voicemail at our website at smartmoveitaly.com/podcast, or just click on the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can find all of the resources and the links to the people and the places that I mentioned in this episode inside the show notes. Ciao for now. A New Life in Italy podcast is a production of Sentire Media, created and hosted by me, Samantha Wilson. Production by London Nero, and with special thanks to Ali Frothingham, Sofia Pisana, and the entire team at Sentire. Follow A New Life in Italy wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, if you're thinking of moving to Italy, whether full-time, part-time, or for a lifetime, come and see me over at smartmoveitaly.com, and we'll help you get here and start living your best life. And don't forget, if you love this episode, please rate and leave a review. It's much appreciated. I can't wait to meet up with you again next week, same time, same place. Ciao for now.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.